Under a merciless July sun, a dirt-streaked farmhand and a graceful woman haul crates across a humming cornfield. She jokes about blisters, then silently bandages his scraped knuckles with her scarf, smiling like it matters. He thanks her, hiding a truth heavier than the sacks. He is Liam Harrington, billionaire CEO heir, undercover to test his arranged bride's heart. If she scorns sweat, he'll end it. If she honors work, he'll kneel. Today, Rosalind Carter lifts with him and lifts his doubt as thunderheads gather westward. The Harrington Agri-Corp tower pierced the Chicago skyline like a glass needle. 47 floors of corporate ambition, where deals worth millions were sealed with handshakes cleaner than surgical instruments. In the penthouse office, Liam Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city blur beneath summer heat waves. At 34, he commanded an agricultural empire worth $12 billion, yet the reflection staring back at him looked hollow, carved out by years of calculated relationships and transactional affections. His mother had died when he was 7, leaving behind only the scent of lavender and a warning written in her journal. Love cannot be bought, only earned through honest work. Now his father lay dying in a private hospital suite, lungs failing from decades of cigars smoked during hostile takeovers. The board of directors, led by William Zane, had delivered their ultimatum 3 days ago: marry within the quarter or watch the stock plummet when news of his father's condition leaked. They'd even selected the bride Rosalind Carter, a part-time cooking instructor from some Midwestern town, chosen because her family's small agricultural connections would look good in the merger documents. The dossier on his desk contained her photograph, auburn hair pulled back from a face unmarked by cosmetic procedures, hands that showed tiny scars from kitchen burns rather than manicure appointments. The investigation firm had noted she lived with her uncle Henry Carter on a dairy farm, taught cooking classes at the community center 3 evenings a week, and had declined 2 previous marriage proposals from wealthier men. What the report couldn't tell him was whether she would love a man for his calluses or his portfolio. Liam made his decision standing there, watching a construction crew far below share sandwiches on a beam. He would become one of them, not a construction worker, but something close enough to test her character. If Rosalind Carter wanted the Harrington fortune, she would have to prove she could respect the kind of man who earned his bread with bleeding hands. The next morning, he drove west in a pickup truck, purchased with cash, leaving behind his Armani suits and platinum cards. By afternoon, he was Liam Hale, drifter looking for farm work. Knocking on Henry Carter's door, the old man who answered had sun-damaged skin like leather left in the rain and eyes that measured a man by his willingness to work. "You know anything about dairy cows?" Henry asked, suspicious of city soft hands. Liam admitted he didn't, but swore he'd learned fast and worked cheap. Something in his desperation genuine, though Henry couldn't know it came from emotional rather than financial poverty, earned him a trial week at $15 an hour. Cash, no questions asked. Rosalind first saw him that evening, silhouetted against the barn door as he struggled with a wheelbarrow stuck in dried mud. She'd just returned from teaching her Tuesday class on rustic breads, flour still dusting her forearms like snow on winter branches. Without hesitation, she set down her bags and walked over, producing work gloves from her pocket as naturally as breathing. "The trick is to rock it back first," she said, demonstrating with economical movements that spoke of years solving such problems. "Gets the wheel out of the rut." Their hands touched briefly as she helped steady the load, and Liam felt calluses on her palms that matched his own freshly forming blisters. "You're the new hand Uncle Henry mentioned," she said, not a question but an acknowledgement. "I'm Rosalind. There's leftover shepherd's pie if you're hungry. We eat at 6:30. She didn't wait for his response, just walked toward the house, with the assumption that anyone who worked deserved to eat. Over dinner, Liam watched her interact with her uncle, cutting his meat without making it obvious his arthritis was acting up, laughing at stories she'd probably heard 50 times before. When Henry introduced him as Liam Hale, down on his luck but willing to work, she simply nodded and passed him the salt, treating him with the same quiet dignity she showed the other farmhands who occasionally joined their table. "If you had the chance to leave this place," Liam asked carefully while helping clear dishes, "would you take it?" The question felt like swallowing glass, knowing he might be that chance. Wrapped in deception, Rosalind dried a plate thoughtfully, considering, "Only if I could bring the people I love with me. Places are just coordinates on a map. People are what make a home. She glanced at her uncle, dozing in his chair by the radio. Besides, someone needs to make sure Henry takes his blood pressure medication and doesn't try to fix the roof himself anymore. That night, Liam lay in the converted barn loft that served as farmhand quarters, staring at cedar beams older than his father's empire. Through the window, he could see the main house where a light burned in what must be Rosalind's room. He wondered what she was thinking, if she knew her name was being discussed in boardrooms, if she would hate him when she learned the truth. The summer air hung thick with the promise of storms, and, somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed like a warning. The first test came with the corn harvest. 4:30 in the morning, the field silver with dew, and Liam deliberately chose the earliest shift to see if Rosalind would appear. His back already ached from 3 days of unfamiliar labor. Blisters had burst and reformed on his palms. And his designer workout routine hadn't prepared him for the specific exhaustion of agricultural work. He was bent over the irrigation lines when footsteps approached through the morning mist. Rosalind carried 2 thermoses of coffee and a small first aid kit. "Figured you might not know about the sunrise shift," she said, pouring him a cup without making him ask. "Henry used to do these rounds himself before his knees gave out. Now we take turns." She noticed him trying to hide his raw hands and, without ceremony, took out antiseptic wipes and bandages. City hands always bleed the first week. Nothing shameful in it. The shame would be in quitting. As she wrapped his palms with practiced efficiency, Liam studied her face in the pale dawn light. No makeup, hair escaping from a practical braid, a small scar on her chin he hadn't noticed in the photographs. "Why help me?" he asked, the question larger than the moment. "Because everyone deserves the chance to prove themselves through honest work," she replied, unconsciously echoing his mother's journal. "And because I've seen you stay late to help George with his sections, even though nobody asked you to." George Leon was the oldest farmhand, 73, and too proud to admit he could no longer keep pace. Liam had been quietly finishing the man's rows after sending him home early, thinking nobody noticed. They worked together through the morning, Rosalind teaching him to read the corn silk for ripeness, to spot disease signs early, to move efficiently through the rows. When the sun climbed high enough to sting, she shared her water bottle without hesitation, her lips touching where his had been moments before. It wasn't romantic, just practical, but Liam felt something shift in his chest like tectonic plates realigning. During the lunch break, he watched her divide her sandwich with George, pretending she'd packed too much. She showed the older man stretches for his chronic back pain, her hands gentle on his shoulders, explaining how her mother had suffered similar aches before she passed. George's eyes watered from gratitude, not pain. And Liam realized this was her way. Small kindnesses delivered without fanfare. Dignity preserved through careful inattention to weakness. The second test came wrapped in a lie about money. One evening, after a particularly brutal day bucking hay bales, Liam mentioned casually that he was thinking of moving on. "Heard there's factory work in the city. Better pay, regular hours, benefits," he said, watching her reaction while pretending to fix a loose board on the porch. Rosalind was shelling peas for tomorrow's dinner, her fingers working automatically while she considered his words. "Money's important," she acknowledged. "Can't eat pride, or pay medical bills with good intentions. But it can't buy the way we treat each other. I've seen rich people so poor in spirit, they couldn't buy a genuine smile if they offered millions." She paused, looking directly at him. "You running towards something or away from something, Liam?" The question cut deeper than she could know. "Maybe both," he admitted. The first honest thing he'd said since arriving. "Well," she said, returning to her peas, "just remember that wherever you go, you pack yourself along. Make sure you like the company." That night, she left a piece of blackberry pie on the porch steps where he'd find it returning from the evening milking. A wordless argument for staying. William Zane called the next day while Liam was mucking stalls, the phone buzzing in his hidden pocket like an angry wasp. "The board is getting restless," his COO warned. "They want the engagement announced before the shareholders' meeting. Your father is asking for you." Liam could hear the hospital monitors beeping in the background, each sound a countdown to decisions he wasn't ready to make. "Tell them I need another week," Liam said, watching through the barn door as Rosalind helped a neighbor's child catch escaped chickens, laughing as feathers flew around them like snow. You don't have a week. Either you marry the girl, or we lose 12% of market value when investors panic." William's voice carried the weight of spreadsheets and profit margins, things that had seemed important in the glass tower, but felt insignificant compared to the way Rosalind had bandaged his hands without making him feel weak. The third test came with the storm. Weather services had predicted it wrong, said it would pass north. But instead, it wheeled directly toward them like God's own fist. The wind rose from whisper to roar in minutes, and suddenly everyone was running. The new calves were still in the far pasture, vulnerable and stupid with youth, and the machine shed's roof was already peeling back like a sardine tin. Rosalind didn't hesitate. While others secured equipment, she sprinted toward the pasture, Liam following because he couldn't imagine doing otherwise. The rain hit like bullets, turning the ground to sucking mud, and visibility dropped to mere feet. They found the calves huddled against a fence line that wouldn't hold if the wind shifted. Together, they herded them toward the barn, Rosalind using her body to shield the smallest one, while Liam fought to keep the makeshift gate from flying off its hinges. Lightning struck close enough to taste copper in the air. And in that blue-white flash, he saw her clearly, soaked through, muddy to her knees, still protecting that calf like it mattered more than her own safety. When they finally got the animals secured, she noticed blood on his arm where the tin roofing had caught him. Without a word, she tore a strip from her own shirt to bind it, her fingers steady, despite the chaos around them. They took shelter in the feed storage, listening to the storm try to tear the world apart outside. "Were you scared?" Liam asked, shivering partly from cold and partly from adrenaline. "Terrified," she admitted. "But fear's just information. Tells you what matters. Those calves mattered. You mattered." She looked at him then, with eyes that seemed to see through his deception to something truer beneath. "If someone you loved turned out to be different than you thought, would you still love them?" The question hung between them like lightning about to strike. "I'd hope they'd tell me the truth before I had to find out," she added softly. And Liam felt the weight of his lies like wet grain, heavy enough to break a man's back. The storm passed, leaving the kind of clean air that makes the world seem newly made. They emerged to find damage the machine shed would need serious repair, and they'd lost some fencing, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with time and effort. As they walked back to the main house, Rosalind reached over and took his hand, her calluses matching his now. Both sets earned honestly, even if everything else between them wasn't. Oliver Flynn arrived 2 days later, a reporter from the agricultural trade magazines who claimed to be doing a piece on small farm operations, but whose eyes were too sharp, his questions too pointed. Funny thing, he mentioned to Rosalind, while photographing the dairy setup, Liam Harrington from Harrington Agri-Corp is supposed to be visiting operations in this area. "You haven't seen anyone like that around here?" Rosalind glanced at Liam, who was helping Henry repair the storm-damaged fence, his shirt soaked with honest sweat. "We don't get many visitors except buyers and the occasional reporter," she said carefully. "Is he lost?" In a manner of speaking, Oliver replied, his camera accidentally on purpose catching Liam in the background. "There's talk he's gone missing from Chicago. Some say he's checking out operations incognito. Others think it's about a woman." He watched her reaction carefully. "The arranged marriage, you know. The board wants him married to some farm girl for the optics." The words hit Rosalind visibly, her spine stiffening like she'd touched an electric fence. "I wouldn't know anything about that," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she returned to her work. Oliver left, but not before taking several more photos, his smile suggesting he'd found exactly what he came for. That evening, Andrea Vivian stopped by, Rosalind's closest friend since childhood, a nurse at the county hospital who brought gossip like others brought casseroles. "You'll never believe what I heard," she began, settling into the kitchen while Rosalind kneaded bread with perhaps more force than necessary. "That arranged marriage thing with the Harrington heir? They say the girl doesn't even know she's been chosen. Can you imagine? Some rich boy thinking he can just buy a wife like she's acreage or cattle." Liam stood frozen outside the screen door, holding the eggs he'd collected, hearing Rosalind's response. "I can't imagine trusting someone who'd start with that kind of lie. If you can't be honest about who you are, what can you be honest about?" He set the eggs on the porch and walked away, but Rosalind had already seen him through the window, had seen the guilt written across his face clearer than any confession. That night, she didn't leave pie on the steps. The absence felt like a judgment. The truth broke with Oliver Flynn's morning article, published online first and then printed in special afternoon editions. The headline was almost gleeful. Billionaire CEO goes undercover as farmhand to test arranged bride. The photo showed Liam clearly, muddy and exhausted, helping with storm cleanup, and another of him at the Harrington Agri-Corp gala 6 months prior. Unmistakably, the same man despite the transformation. Rosalind read it on her phone while making breakfast, her hand so steady that Henry didn't notice anything wrong until she set down his plate with unusual precision and walked out without a word. She found Liam in the barn, already packing his few belongings. Oliver's article pulled up on his hidden smartphone. "How long?" she asked from the doorway, backlit by morning sun like an avenging angel in work boots. "From the beginning," he admitted, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm Liam Harrington. The board arranged our marriage without asking either of us. I came to see if you were like the others, if you'd love me for money or if I was good enough to pass your test." Her voice could have frozen July. "Tell me, what grade did I earn? Did I perform adequately? Should I be grateful I passed your inspection? Rosalind, please." I bandaged your hands. The words came out broken, like she was just now understanding the depth of betrayal. "I shared my table, my family, my work. I defended you to Oliver Flynn. And the whole time, you were what? Taking notes? Scoring my responses? I fell in love with you," Liam said desperately. "That's the truth. I came here to test you. But you ended up testing me. And I failed. I failed because I couldn't trust. Couldn't believe someone might actually love you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. How could I love someone I never actually met? Liam Hale might have had a chance, but Liam Harrington? He's just another rich man who thinks everything has a price tag. She pulled off the scarf she'd used to bandage his hands that first week and let it fall to the barn floor. "Tell your board to find another farm girl. This one's not for sale." She left him standing there among the hay bales and history, holding that scarf like evidence of a crime only he had committed. The separation stretched like drought across summer fields. Rosalind returned to her cooking classes, her everyday rhythms, but there were gaps where he'd been the undone evening chores she'd grown used to sharing, the empty chair at dinner, the silence where his questions used to fill the air. She didn't mention him, and Henry, wise in the ways of heartbreak, didn't ask. But sometimes she'd find herself looking at the barn loft where light no longer burned at night. In Chicago, Liam sat through board meetings like a man attending his own funeral. William presented alternative candidates for marriage daughters of agricultural dynasties, food processing heiresses, women with MBAs and pedigrees suitable for merging with the Harrington legacy. His father, struggling for each breath in his hospital bed, asked only once, "Did you find what your mother wanted you to find?" When Liam couldn't answer, the old man closed his eyes and said, "Then go back and find it." The harvest festival arrived with September, the town's annual celebration of survival and abundance. Rosalind went, because not going would invite questions she didn't want to answer. She helped her uncle set up their booth selling fresh cheese and honey, trying not to think about how Liam would have hefted the heavy display cases without being asked. The moment she saw the Harrington Agri-Corp banner being raised over the main stage, her stomach dropped. William Zane directed the setup with corporate efficiency, while reporters gathered like crows. Then Liam appeared, and the crowd's murmur rose like wind through wheat. He looked different, thinner, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most farm families made in a month. But his hands were still calloused. She could see them when he refused gloves to help move equipment. The board had arranged for him to announce a new partnership with local farms, a feel-good moment to smooth over the scandal of his deception. He was supposed to speak about sustainable agriculture and corporate responsibility, make promises about fair pricing and ethical sourcing that would photograph well and mean nothing. Instead, he walked to the microphone and said, "I came to your community under false pretenses. I lied to good people, accepted their hospitality, and repaid trust with deception." The crowd fell silent. even the children, sensing something significant was happening. I told myself I was testing someone else's character, but the only character that failed was mine. He looked across the crowd and found Rosalind standing at the edge, holding a wheel of cheese she'd been about to price. I met a woman here who taught me that honest work means more than stock options, who showed me that kindness doesn't require witnesses and that love can't be tested, only offered freely or not at all. I thought I was wealthy when I arrived. I learned I was bankrupt in everything that mattered. The board members were frantically signaling him to stop, but Liam continued. Harrington AgriCorp will be implementing new policies, effective immediately. Fair pricing guarantees for small farmers, transparent contracts, profit sharing with seasonal workers. Not because it's good PR, but because a woman with bandages in her pocket taught me that we rise or fall together. He stepped away from the microphone and walked through the parting crowd, straight to the muddy area where trucks were unloading. Without hesitation, he began helping Henry Carter's neighbor move heavy milk cans, his expensive suit collecting stains with each lift. He worked in silence, letting his actions speak what words had failed to convey. Rosalind approached slowly, still carrying that wheel of cheese like armor. "Pretty speech," she said quietly. "But speeches are just wind if they're not backed by weather." "Then let me be weather," he replied, setting down a milk can to face her. "I'll sign contracts today, in front of everyone. Binding legal documents that guarantee everything I promised. And if you never forgive me, if you want nothing to do with me, I'll still honor those contracts. Because you were right. Some things shouldn't have price tags." William appeared with a briefcase, looking miserable but resigned. Inside were contracts already drawn up. Liam had spent the weeks of their separation fighting the board, threatening to liquidate his personal holdings, using every piece of leverage to make this moment possible. As farmers gathered to read the terms, murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. These weren't token gestures but substantial commitments that would cost Harrington AgriCorp millions. "Why?" Rosalind asked, watching him sign document after document in front of witnesses. "Because you asked for honesty," he said simply. "This is me being honest. I love you. I loved you when you bandaged my hands and when you shared your sandwich with George and when you saved those calves in the storm. I loved you before I knew I was allowed to, when I thought love was just another transaction. If you tell me to leave, I'll go. But the contracts stay. That's not a purchase. It's penance." She stood there for a long moment, cheese wheel still clutched against her chest, watching him transform corporate power into community promise with each signature. Finally, she set down the cheese and picked up one of the contracts, reading it carefully. "This clause here," she said, pointing to a section about seasonal worker health care. "It should include families, not just individuals." Liam took the pen she offered and amended the contract on the spot. What else? They worked through the documents together as the sun began to set, making changes that reflected real understanding of farm life, not boardroom abstractions. The crowd gradually dispersed, leaving them sitting on hay bales in the fading light, surrounded by signed papers worth more than some entire harvests. "I don't know if I can trust you again," Rosalind said honestly. "Trust is like soil once erosion starts. It takes time to build back." "Then let me be a cover crop," Liam said, remembering the agricultural metaphors she'd taught him. "Something that holds the soil in place while better things grow." She almost smiled at that. You'd have to actually work the farm, not as a test or a gesture, but because the work needs doing. "I know, and live in that drafty loft, not some corporate apartment." "I know, and tell me the truth. Even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient or embarrassing." "Starting now," he agreed. "The truth is, I'm terrified. I've never done anything that mattered without a safety net of money beneath me. But you matter. This matters. And I want to earn the right to matter to you." Rosalind stood, brushing hay from her jeans. "The morning shift starts at 4:30. If you're there, we can talk about cover crops and soil restoration. If you're not, I'll know this was just another performance." She walked away, but as she passed, her fingers brushed his. Not a promise, but not a rejection either. Just acknowledgement that some things, like trust and soil and love, take time to build properly. Liam was there at 4:15, wearing his old farmhand clothes that he'd kept despite everything. Rosalind arrived with coffee and first aid supplies, just as she had weeks ago, but this time she also brought work gloves that would fit his hands properly. She'd noticed his size and remembered. They worked in companionable silence as dawn broke across the corn, and when she showed him how to test soil pH, their hands touched over the testing kit. This time, neither pulled away. "Cover crops," she said. "Work best when you commit to the full season." "I'm thinking multiple seasons," he replied. "Maybe permanent cultivation." October arrived with its harvest fullness, the fields golden and ready. Liam had been true to his word, working every brutal shift, learning to read weather patterns and cattle moods, earning George's grudging respect and Henry's careful approval. The contracts had been implemented, and already 3 local farms had been saved from foreclosure through the new partnership terms. More importantly, he'd learned to be himself, not Liam Hale the deception or Liam Harrington the heir, but someone in between who could discuss Proust at Rosalind's book club and still wake before dawn to milk cows. He'd flown to Chicago twice for board meetings, each time returning on the same day, unwilling to miss even one morning shift. His father had died in September, peacefully, knowing his son had found what his mother had wanted for him. At the funeral, Rosalind had stood beside him, not as the arranged bride but as someone choosing to be present for grief. When society photographers tried to caption them as the billionaire and his farm girl, she'd corrected them. Partners. In work. And, if we're lucky, in more. The proposal came without warning on an ordinary Thursday. They were harvesting the last of the corn, working side by side as they had for months now, when Liam stopped mid-row and dropped to one knee in the dirt. He didn't have a ring that would have been too much like the old Liam, trying to buy what couldn't be purchased. "Rosalind Carter," he said, his hands dirty and his heart clean, "I'm asking you to marry me. Not because a board decreed it or because it makes good business sense, but because you taught me that love is daily work. And I want to do that work beside you. I have nothing to offer except myself, honest and unadorned. Is that enough?" She looked at him, kneeling in the soil they'd worked together. This man who'd learned to see calluses as beautiful and simple food as feast enough. "Get up," she said, and his heart sank until she added, "Partners don't kneel to each other. They stand together." When he stood, she kissed him, tasting coffee and sunrise, and the promise of seasons turning together. "Yes," she said against his mouth, "but we're having the wedding here, in the barn. And you're wearing your work clothes. I wouldn't have it any other way." The wedding took place after harvest, the barn decorated with cornstalks and autumn leaves. William Zane was best man, still bewildered, but loyal. Andrea was maid of honor, having forgiven the deception when she saw how Liam looked at Rosalind during their vows. George walked Rosalind down the aisle since her parents were gone, and Henry's knees wouldn't manage it, though Henry officiated with the authority of someone who'd watched love grow like a careful crop. Rosalind wore her grandmother's dress, practical cotton that had seen 3 generations of farm weddings. Liam wore jeans and the shirt she'd mended after the storm, his hands bearing the permanent calluses of honest work. When they exchanged rings, simple bands bought with farm wages. Not Harrington money, Oliver Flynn photographed the moment, for what became the most shared agricultural article of the year. "Love grows best in honest soil." In his vows, Liam said, "You taught me that wealth isn't measured in portfolios, but in the willingness to lift heavy things for people who matter. I promise to lift with you, always." Rosalind replied, "You learned that trust must be earned with every sunrise. I promise to meet you at dawn. Always." The reception was potluck, the whole community bringing dishes made from their own harvests. They danced to a neighbor's fiddle band in the same barn where Liam had first learned to milk cows. When midnight came, they were still dancing, Rosalind's head on his shoulder, his arms around her like he was holding something more precious than any acquisition his company had ever made. "No regrets?" she asked softly. "Only one," he admitted. "I wish I'd been honest from the beginning. Think of all the time we wasted." She pulled back to look at him, dirt from the day's work still under her fingernails, his hair mussed from dancing. "Nothing's wasted if it's composted properly." Everything we went through enriched the soil we're standing on now. The moon rose full over the cornfields, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded not a warning this time, but a benediction. They would divide their time between the farm and Chicago, bringing Henry with them when his health required it, using the Harrington fortune to support agricultural communities while never forgetting that the real treasure was in the work itself. Years later, when business students studied the transformation of Harrington AgriCorp into the most successful and ethical agricultural company in America, they focused on the contracts and the profit-sharing models. But those who knew the real story understood it differently. A man had knelt in actual dirt rather than boardroom carpet, and a woman had chosen to trust someone who'd learned to tell the truth. Love, they discovered, grew best not in the sterile safety of wealth, but in the rich soil of shared labor, where two people could work side by side through all seasons, knowing that some harvests trust, respect, love, were worth more than any fortune ever counted in coins. The scarf Rosalind had used to bandage Liam's hands that first day now hung framed in their kitchen, faded but still whole, a reminder that healing happens when we dare to touch each other's wounds with gentle hands. And every morning, no matter how successful Harrington AgriCorp became, they still met at 4:30 to work the dawn shift together, their calluses matching perfectly, their hearts even more so.